The morning sun crept through the blinds, touching every corner of the small living room that once felt warm but now carried only silence and worry. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, a pile of unopened bills in front of her. The sound of the old refrigerator was the only thing breaking the quiet. She stared at the numbers on the papers, trying to add them again and again, as if somehow the total might shrink if she just believed hard enough. Her husband, David, walked in, already dressed for work, his eyes tired and heavy. "Any mail?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. "Just more of the same," she said softly. She didn't have the energy to hide the worry in her voice anymore. David sat down across from her. "We'll figure it out. We always do." But Sarah knew things were different this time. The mortgage was overdue, the credit cards were maxed, and David's small auto repair shop had been losing business for months. They were weeks away from losing the house, the home they had built together with dreams and sacrifices. After David left, Sarah stayed at the table, staring at the unpaid bills. Each envelope felt like a countdown. She thought about calling the bank again, but she already knew what they'd say. They'd heard her pleas before. Later that afternoon, she drove into town to meet with a loan officer, hoping for a miracle. The bank lobby was quiet, the air smelling faintly of coffee and printer ink. Behind a sleek glass desk sat Michael Grant, the same man who had helped them secure their first mortgage years ago. He greeted her with a professional smile that barely reached his eyes. "Sarah," he said, shaking her hand. "I saw your name on the schedule. How have you been?" She forced a smile. "Trying to keep our home, honestly." He gestured for her to sit. "I've looked at your file. It's difficult. You're behind on several payments, and with the market the way it is, refinancing isn't an option right now." Sarah's heart sank. She could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner. Every second stretching into silence. "Michael," she said quietly, "there has to be something. I can't let my family lose everything." He leaned back in his chair, studying her expression. "I wish I had better news. You and David have always been good clients. But rules are rules." She nodded, blinking away tears. "I understand." As she stood to leave, Michael hesitated. "Look, Sarah," he said gently, "there might be other ways I can help. Maybe something off record." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He cleared his throat. "Sometimes we have programs, temporary relief options that aren't part of the usual system. If you can come by later this week, maybe we can go over them in detail." His tone was professional, but something in his eyes unsettled her, a flicker she couldn't quite name. Still, she clung to hope. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That night, Sarah told David that the bank might have a way to help them. His face lit up for the first time in weeks. "See? I told you something would come through," he said, wrapping his arms around her. But the warmth of his embrace didn't reach her heart. Something about Michael's words echoed in her mind. The next few days passed in slow motion. Sarah went about her routines, cleaning, cooking, making calls, all while carrying a storm of anxiety inside. Every sound, every unpaid notice slipping under the door, reminded her that time was running out. When Friday came, she found herself standing outside Michael's office again. He greeted her warmly and offered coffee. The blinds were half drawn, the sunlight casting lines across the desk. "I appreciate you coming back," he said. "I did some digging. There might be a temporary extension we can file for, but—" He paused, tapping his pen thoughtfully. "It would require a personal endorsement." "From me?" Sarah tilted her head. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said slowly, "I'd have to vouch for you. It's a big risk. If something goes wrong, I could lose my job." She clasped her hands together. "Please, Michael. I'll do whatever it takes. You know, we're good people. We just need time." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're asking me to take a very big step, and I will, but I need to know that you understand what that means." Sarah's throat went dry. The room felt smaller suddenly. She realized the help he was offering wasn't about paperwork or rules. It was about something else, something he wasn't saying directly. She stood, her heart racing. "I think I understand," she said softly. Think about it, Michael said calmly. You don't have to decide today. Just come back when you're sure. She nodded, leaving quickly, her pulse hammering in her ears. That night she sat alone in the living room. Staring at the flickering light of the TV, David was asleep on the couch, exhausted after another long day at the shop. Sarah looked at him, at the man she'd loved for so many years, the man who still believed things would somehow get better. She wished she could believe it too. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Michael. If you're ready to talk, I'll be at the office tomorrow morning. I can help you. She turned off the screen, her mind spinning. She didn't know what to do. Every path felt wrong. The next morning she drove to the lake, parking near the water's edge. It was quiet there, just the sound of waves brushing against the shore. She sat for hours thinking about her life, her choices, and the home she was about to lose, finally. As the sun began to set, she made her decision. That evening, Sarah returned home, her face pale but calm. David was at the kitchen table, sorting through bills again. He looked up and smiled faintly. You okay? She forced a smile. Yeah, I think. I might have found a way. He looked at her with hope that hurt to see. Really? Yes, she said softly. I'll know by tomorrow. When he reached across the table and took her hand, she squeezed it tightly, fighting back tears. He didn't ask how. He didn't see the fear behind her eyes. That night, as the house grew quiet, Sarah sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the trees. She thought of the promise she was about to make, not out of love or desire, but out of desperation. She whispered to herself, just once, just this time. Then it'll all be over. But deep down, she knew that choices made in desperation never truly end. They echo in ways no one can predict. When morning came, she took a deep breath, put on her coat, and left before David woke up. The sun was barely rising when she reached the bank. The building loomed ahead of her, quiet and cold. She hesitated at the door, her reflection staring back at her in the glass. For a moment, she almost turned away. But then she thought of their home, the laughter, the late nights, the dreams they'd built brick by brick, and with trembling hands she pushed the door open. The glass doors of the bank reflected the morning sun as Sarah stepped inside. Her hands were cold, her heartbeat uneven. The sound of her footsteps echoed on the marble floor as she approached the hallway leading to Michael's office. Everything around her looked too clean, too calm, too far from the chaos inside her chest. Michael looked up from his desk when she entered. Sarah, he said softly, as if he'd been expecting her. His voice was calm, his expression polite, almost gentle. He gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit down. I'm glad you came. Sarah sat quietly, her fingers intertwined in her lap. I just want to save our home, she said. That's all. Michael nodded slowly. I understand, and I'm willing to help. But this stays between us. There was a long pause. She could feel his gaze on her, not cruel, but weighted. Every second stretched thin. Finally, he slid a folder across the table, a loan extension document already prepared. This can buy you time, he said. 6 months. No interest. Her heart jumped. 6 months. He nodded. It's not standard. I had to adjust some files. But you'll be fine as long as we keep this between us. Sarah swallowed hard. The relief she should have felt was tangled with something else. Fear, guilt, confusion. Why are you doing this? She asked. Michael leaned back in his chair. Because I can, and because I believe you deserve a chance. There was no threat, no pressure, just words that sounded kind but felt heavy. She signed the paper, her hands trembling. He stood and offered his hand. You've made the right choice, he said. When she walked out of the bank, the world seemed brighter. The air was cool, the sky wide and blue. She wanted to believe everything would be okay now. But deep inside, something didn't feel right. That evening, she handed the loan approval to David. His eyes widened, his voice breaking with relief. You did it. She nodded. We have 6 more months. He hugged her tightly, whispering, You saved us, Sarah. She forced a smile, hiding the ache in her chest. The moment should have felt like victory, but it didn't. It felt like a debt she couldn't repay. Days passed. The tension in their house eased. David started picking up extra work, trying to rebuild his business. Sarah tried to go back to normal cooking, cleaning, pretending everything was fine. But every time her phone buzzed, her heart jumped. She expected to see Michael's name, and she was right. A week later, his message appeared. "We should talk soon. You still owe me that coffee." Sarah stared at the words for a long time before replying. "I don't think that's a good idea." He answered almost instantly. "Just coffee, Sarah. Don't make it sound like more than that." She didn't reply. But 2 days later, she found herself sitting in a quiet cafe downtown, her nerves on fire. Michael arrived exactly on time, dressed neatly, carrying that same calmness that both comforted and unsettled her. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting down. "I wanted to see how you were doing." Sarah sipped her coffee, avoiding his eyes. "We're doing better. David's working again. I'm grateful for what you did." Ko smiled faintly. "You don't owe me anything. I just wanted to help." But the way he said it didn't sound simple. His eyes lingered a moment too long, his tone too personal. Sarah looked down at her cup. "I should go," she said after a while. "Of course," he said softly. "But Sarah, don't disappear. I meant what I said. I want to help you." She left the cafe feeling lighter and heavier all at once. There was no direct line crossed, but something unspoken hung in the air. It was like standing at the edge of a storm, feeling the pressure before the rain. Over the next few weeks, Michael's messages continued. Sometimes they were work-related updates about her loan status. Other times they were more personal. "You looked tired last time. Are you sleeping okay?" Or, "You're stronger than you think. Sarah." She didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to ignore him, to erase everything. But another part, the part that had felt invisible for so long, responded. His attention felt like light in a place that had been dim for years. David noticed the change. "You've been quiet lately," he said one night as they ate dinner. "Is everything okay?" Sarah forced a smile. "Just tired." But she could feel the distance between them growing. David was always working, always exhausted. He still loved her, but their conversations had become short, practical. The laughter that once filled their evenings was gone. One rainy afternoon, Sarah stopped by the bank again to drop off a document. Michael wasn't in his office, but his assistant told her to wait. She sat in the lobby listening to the rain against the glass. When he finally arrived, he smiled, like seeing her was the best part of his day. "Sarah," he said warmly, "you didn't tell me you were coming." "I just needed to drop something off," she said quickly. He nodded. "Let's talk for a minute." Inside his office, the air was quiet. He sat across from her, his voice low. "You've been avoiding me." She looked away. "I didn't want to complicate things." "Complicated?" he asked gently. "You mean human?" Sarah froze. His words were disarming, not forceful, not demanding, just simple. But they reached a place inside her she didn't want touched. "Michael, I'm married." She said softly. "I know," he replied, "and I respect that. I just think you deserve someone who listens to you." She stood up quickly, her heart pounding. "I should go." He didn't stop her. But as she turned, he said, "You made a brave choice once, Sarah. Just make sure it's not the only one you ever make." His words followed her home. That night she lay awake beside David, staring at the ceiling. The rain outside sounded like whispers she couldn't silence. Weeks passed. She tried to bury it, the messages, the meetings, the way her heart reacted when she saw his name. But guilt has a way of growing in silence. One evening, as she folded laundry, David walked in, holding her phone. "Michael texted you," he said casually, handing it over. Her stomach dropped. She took it quickly. "Just about paperwork," she said to fast. David paused. "Sarah, is there something I should know?" She shook her head. "No, of course not." But the doubt in his eyes hurt more than any words. Later that night, when David went to bed, Sarah sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. She typed a message to Michael, "We can't talk anymore." But before she could send it, another message appeared from him first. "Meet me tomorrow. One last time." She closed her eyes, torn between reason and confusion. Every part of her said no. But something deeper, the ache of fear, of shame, of longing whispered yes. The next day she stood by the lake, the same one where she had gone weeks earlier to think. Michael was there, waiting near the dock, his coat fluttering in the wind. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice barely steady. He looked at her quietly. "I just wanted to see if you're okay. You've been carrying too much." She crossed her arms. "This isn't right. I can't do this." "I know," he said softly, "and I'm not asking you to. But Sarah, listen." She turned away, her eyes stinging. "Please don't." But then he said something that froze her completely. "I'm leaving the bank next week. This won't matter soon. I just needed you to know you're the reason I stayed as long as I did." She looked at him, confused, angry, and moved all at once. "Why tell me that?" "Because I don't want you to carry guilt for something that never happened," he said quietly. "You made a choice to save your home, not to lose yourself." And with that, he walked away. Sarah stood there watching him disappear into the mist. Her heart was heavy, but for the first time she understood she hadn't been saving the house. She'd been trying to save herself from hopelessness, from silence, from feeling invisible. When she got home, David was waiting. He didn't ask questions. He just opened his arms. She walked into them and broke down. Tears she'd been holding for months finally falling. That night, she told him everything. The loan, the meetings, the guilt. David didn't speak at first. He just held her. After a long silence, he whispered, "We'll fix this. Together." And for the first time, Sarah believed him. The sun rose over the small town, casting warm golden light through the windows of Sarah and David's home. It was quiet, peaceful, in a way that felt almost fragile after the storms they had weathered. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mortgage papers she had signed weeks ago. They were official now. Their home was safe. The weight she had carried for so long finally felt lighter, though the memories of the choices she had made still lingered in her mind like shadows at the edges of sunlight. David walked in, freshly showered and wearing a crisp shirt. "Morning," he said softly, smiling. He set down 2 mugs of coffee. "Sleep okay?" Sarah shook her head slightly. "Better." "I'm ready for today?" David handed her a mug. "We've been through a lot, but we're still here." She nodded, feeling the warmth of the coffee in her hands and the warmth of David's presence. There was something comforting about the ordinary breakfast, the sunlight, the quiet house, something she hadn't appreciated in months. The past weeks had been a whirlwind. Between Michael's loan adjustment and David picking up extra work at the auto shop, they had begun to rebuild. They met late nights going over finances, cutting unnecessary expenses, and dreaming about how the next year could be different. Sarah had learned to be practical again, but also to trust her instincts, to value her courage even when it had led her into uncertainty. Still, the memory of Michael's office, the quiet conversations, the way his words had struck her in unexpected ways lingered. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. It was a quiet understanding that life sometimes placed people in positions where their choices were tested, and the outcomes weren't black and white. One afternoon, as Sarah was organizing the living room, David's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's Michael," he said. "He's probably checking in about the loan." Sarah felt a flicker of anxiety but forced herself to stay calm. "I'll handle it," she said. She picked up the phone. "Hello." Sarah, Michael's voice came through, calm, professional. "I just wanted to make sure everything is on track. The house, the finances, are you both okay?" She smiled softly, feeling the tension ease. "We're doing better. Thanks to you." "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "You did all the work. I just facilitated a little." There was a pause. Then he said quietly, "I hope you realize you didn't owe me anything beyond doing what you had to do." "I know," she said sincerely. Thank you, Michael, truly." The line went silent for a moment. Then he said, "Good. Take care of yourselves. And remember, strength isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about knowing when to move forward." That evening, Sarah and David sat together on the porch, watching the sunset over their backyard. The sky blushed pink and gold, mirrored by the quiet lake at the edge of their property. It felt surreal, the calm after weeks of tension, the peace after sleepless nights and anxious mornings. "I'm proud of us," David said quietly. "You carried so much on your shoulders, Sarah. I don't think I ever thanked you properly." Sarah shook her head. "We did it together. You worked so hard too. I couldn't have done any of it without you." They held hands in silence, feeling the simple joy of being together, of surviving the worst of their fears. There were no dramatic declarations, no grand gestures, just two people quietly rebuilding a life that had been shaken, but not broken. Over the next few weeks, things began to stabilize. David's shop started getting more clients again, thanks to a combination of word of mouth and careful budgeting. Sarah began volunteering at a local community center, teaching budgeting and finance classes to families struggling like theirs had. Sharing her story without going into personal details gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't realized she was missing. She was learning that redemption wasn't just about fixing mistakes, it was about helping others navigate their own challenges. One afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected envelope in the mail. Inside was a simple note from Michael. "Your courage was remarkable. Remember, the choices you make under pressure show who you really are. Keep building your life the way you deserve." There was no bank paperwork attached, no hidden messages, just words, kind, reflective, affirming. Sarah folded the note carefully and put it in her journal. She felt a quiet release. The anxiety that had followed her like a shadow was beginning to lift. That night, she and David sat on the porch again, watching the stars emerge one by one. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and the faint sound of crickets. "I never thought we'd get through that," David said softly. "There were nights I didn't think we could make it." Sarah leaned against him. "I know, but we did, and we're stronger because of it." David nodded, wrapping his arm around her. "We've learned what matters. Not money, not bills, us. The home, yes, but more than that, us together." For the first time in months, Sarah felt truly present. The fear, the worry, the guilt, they were still there in faint traces, but they no longer defined her. She realized that she had grown stronger, braver, and more resilient. Her sacrifices had been difficult, but they had reminded her of the power of choice, the strength of love, and the value of trust. Days turned into weeks, and life gradually regained its rhythm. The house, once threatened by foreclosure, became a place of laughter again. Sarah and David painted the rooms, planted flowers in the garden, and slowly, cautiously, allowed themselves to dream about the future. One afternoon, as Sarah was arranging books on the living room shelf, David came up behind her. "You know," he said with a grin, "we survived the worst of it. Maybe we deserve a little celebration." Sarah turned, smiling. "I think we do." They cooked dinner together, laughing over burnt edges and spilled sauce. For the first time in months, their home felt like the sanctuary it had always been: warm, filled with love, and alive with shared memories and small victories. The next morning, as sunlight poured through the windows, Sarah felt a sense of clarity. She didn't need validation from anyone but herself. She had made difficult choices under impossible circumstances, faced her fears, and come out stronger on the other side. And most importantly, she had done it with David by her side. Life wasn't perfect. There were still bills to pay, repairs to make, and challenges to face. But Sarah understood something essential now. The measure of a person wasn't in avoiding hardship, but in navigating it with courage, honesty, and love. Weeks later, as she walked along the lake behind their home, Sarah paused and looked at the water shimmering in the afternoon sun. She thought of Michael one last time, with gratitude for the way he had helped when she needed it most, and with understanding that some encounters change you quietly, without fanfare. And without lasting complication, turning back toward the house, she felt a sense of peace. Their home, their family, and their love had survived the storm. And though the memories of fear and sacrifice would always linger, they were no longer burdens. They were proof of what she could endure, what she could overcome. David joined her on the porch later that evening, bringing 2 mugs of tea. They sat together, side by side, watching the sun dip behind the horizon. "Do you ever think about how close we were to losing everything?" he asked quietly. "All the time," Sarah replied. "But now we know what really matters." And for the first time in a long time, they felt it, not just relief, not just safety, but hope. Quiet, steady hope, the kind that grows slowly after hardship, rooted in love, trust, and shared strength. Because sometimes the hardest choices teach you the most. Sometimes survival is about more than keeping a roof over your head. It's about reclaiming your heart, your courage, and your life. Sarah leaned her head against David's shoulder. "We made it," she whispered. "Yes," he said. "We made it together." The wind stirred through the trees. The stars blinked awake in the night sky, and the house once threatened, once fragile, now felt whole again. And in that quiet moment, Sarah knew the sacrifice had been worth it. Not for the money saved, not for the walls preserved, but for the love, resilience, and trust that had survived it all. They had endured. They had healed, and they had begun anew, stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. Ethan Turner never believed small moments could change lives until the day he met Rachel Carter. It was an ordinary Tuesday in Portland. The city was damp from an early morning drizzle, the streets glistening under gray skies. Ethan rushed into the glass building of his marketing firm, coffee in one hand, laptop bag over his shoulder, trying to beat the clock inside the office. The air was filled with soft chatter, the hum of printers, and the faint scent of rain on coats. As he moved toward his desk, his eyes caught someone sitting by the window, a woman he'd seen before but never really noticed this way. Her name was Rachel Carter. She was focused on her laptop, her brown hair slightly curled at the ends, and a thin silver ring on her left hand sparkled under the light. She looked up at that very moment. Their eyes met for a brief second, long enough for something unexplainable to pass between them. She smiled politely, then returned to her screen. But Ethan's mind didn't move on as easily. He tried to push it aside. She was married. That much was clear. And he had no business thinking about a married woman. But throughout the day, that image of her, calm, graceful, distant, kept replaying in his head. Later that evening, when most of the office had emptied, Ethan stayed behind to finish a presentation. The rain had started again, soft and steady against the glass windows. When he walked to the break room to grab another coffee, he found Rachel there, standing near the window with a cup in her hands. The city lights reflected on her face, giving her an almost dreamlike glow. "You're still here?" he asked, surprised. She smiled faintly. "Deadlines. They always seem to find me." He chuckled. "I know that feeling. I was hoping I wasn't the only one working late." For a moment, silence filled the room, comfortable silence. The rain tapping against the glass seemed to bridge the distance between them. Then she asked quietly, "Do you ever feel like you're just existing? Like your life isn't really yours anymore?" Ethan looked at her, unsure how to respond. Her tone wasn't dramatic. It was honest, almost fragile. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "I know exactly what that feels like." She smiled softly, but her eyes told another story, a story of exhaustion, loneliness, and longing. They talked for nearly an hour. About small things that weren't small at all, about dreams left behind, places they wanted to see, and the kind of life they once imagined for themselves. She told him she used to paint before marriage. But somewhere between responsibilities and expectations, she lost that part of herself. Ethan shared his dream of opening a small bookstore, a place filled with old pages and quiet afternoons. Before leaving, Rachel said, "Thank you for listening. It's rare to find someone who actually does." "Anytime," he replied, and meant it. As she walked away, he noticed her touch her wedding ring. It wasn't a tender gesture, it looked hesitant, thoughtful, almost heavy. That night, Ethan lay awake, thinking about her voice, the way she smiled through sadness. He told himself to forget it. But something deep down told him this wasn't the end of their story. Days passed, and what began as polite greetings turned into small conversations, then longer ones. They'd share coffee breaks, talk about work, and sometimes when the office was quiet, they'd sit together in silence, watching the city through the tall windows. One evening, the weather changed everything. A thunderstorm hit the city unexpectedly, and by the time most of the employees had left, only Ethan and Rachel remained. The power flickered, then went out, leaving the office dimly lit by emergency lights. "Well," Ethan said, trying to lighten the moment, "looks like we're stuck." Rachel laughed softly. "Could be worse." They stood near the window, watching the rain hammer against the glass. The storm outside seemed to echo the turmoil inside them loud. Wild and impossible to ignore. Rachel spoke after a long pause. "Do you ever think about how life might have been if you'd made one different choice?" He looked at her, his heart tightening. "Sometimes I do. But then I remind myself we can't live on what ifs." She smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Maybe. But sometimes what ifs are all we have left." The thunder rolled across the sky. She was close enough for him to notice the faint scent of her perfume, something light and familiar. Neither of them moved. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of everything unspoken. When the lights came back on, Rachel took a small step back and whispered, "I should go." "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "Good night." But that night didn't leave either of them. Something had changed. Something both of them felt but neither dared to name. The next few weeks blurred into a rhythm of glances, shared laughter, and long conversations that never crossed the line but somehow danced around it. They met for coffee at a small cafe near the park where Rachel always ordered cappuccino and Ethan stuck with black coffee. It became their unspoken routine. Once, during one of those meetings, she said, "I think people assume that marriage means happiness, but sometimes it just means you stop trying to find it." Ethan didn't know what to say, but her words stayed with him long after she left. He wanted to tell her that she deserved more, that everyone did, but he didn't. Some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud. One evening, as they walked out of the office together, Rachel told him her husband, Daniel, was often away on business trips. She said it casually, but Ethan sensed the loneliness behind the words. She laughed softly and said, "Funny, isn't it? You can share a house with someone and still feel alone." He looked at her, his voice low. "Yeah, I know that kind of silence." The connection between them grew in the quiet spaces between words, between looks. He started noticing small things. How she always hummed quietly when she was nervous. How her eyes softened when she talked about her younger days. How she tried to sound strong even when her heart seemed tired, but every time his feelings grew stronger. That ring would catch the light and reality would pull him back. It was a reminder of everything he couldn't have. Then came the night of the company dinner. The restaurant was warm and filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. Ethan hadn't planned on sitting near Rachel, but fate had other ideas. She looked stunning in a simple navy dress, her hair tucked behind her ears. Every time their eyes met, something inside him twisted. As the evening went on, their conversations grew lighter, their smiles more genuine. Yet beneath the laughter, there was tension, like two magnets trying not to pull toward each other at one point. When the lights dimmed and soft music played, Rachel leaned slightly closer and said, "You make things feel different, Ethan." He didn't know how to respond. His throat tightened, his mind raced, but he only managed to faint, "You do too." The night ended with her leaving early. As she brushed past him near the door, her hand grazed his. It was brief, accidental, or maybe it wasn't. She whispered, "We need to talk." Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady. Then she walked away. Disappearing into the crowd, Ethan stood there for a long moment, heart pounding, unsure whether he should feel guilty or grateful for what had just happened. On the drive home, her words replayed in his head. "We need to talk." He didn't know what she meant, but he knew that nothing about his life or hers would ever be the same again as he lay awake that night. He remembered her voice, her smile, the sadness in her eyes, and the way her ring had glimmered under the restaurant lights. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a symbol of everything that kept them apart. And yet, deep down, Ethan couldn't stop wishing that one day she might take it off, not for him, but for herself. He closed his eyes, knowing the story they had begun was already far beyond their control. The next morning, Ethan woke up to the sound of rain again. Portland had a way of matching his moods, lately gray, quiet, and unpredictable. He couldn't shake the echo of Rachel's words from the night before. "We need to talk." It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Something about her tone carried both fear and longing. Like she had been holding something in for far too long at work. She wasn't at her desk. Her absence felt heavier than it should have. Every time he looked toward her chair, he felt a strange emptiness, as though he had lost something that wasn't his to begin with. He tried to focus on his tasks, but his thoughts kept drifting toward her. By noon, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Rachel. "Can we meet after work? Same cafe? 6:30. He stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "I'll be there." The day felt longer than usual, every tick of the clock pulling him closer to something he didn't fully understand but couldn't walk away from. When the evening finally came, he found himself sitting at the small corner table they always chose, the one near the window with a view of the rainy street. Rachel arrived a few minutes later, her umbrella dripping, her hair slightly damp. She looked tired, as if she hadn't slept well. She smiled faintly when she saw him, but there was no light in her eyes. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," she replied, sitting across from him. For a while, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain filled the silence between them. Finally, Rachel exhaled and said, "I didn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about everything." Ethan nodded. "Me too." She looked down at her hands, the ring glinting faintly under the cafe lights. "I shouldn't have said what I did last night. I shouldn't have let things get this far." "You haven't done anything wrong," Ethan said, though his voice lacked conviction. She shook her head. "That's the thing. I haven't done anything, but I feel like I have. I keep waiting for this guilt to fade, but it doesn't." He leaned forward, his tone gentle. "Rachel, I don't want to make things harder for you. If this, whatever it is hurting you, then maybe we should." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. She looked up, eyes glassy. "It's not you that's hurting me, Ethan. It's my life. It's waking up every morning and realizing I'm married to someone who stopped seeing me years ago. Daniel's not a bad man. He's just not the man I thought I married. He's distant, cold, we live together, but it feels like two strangers sharing a roof." Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say, so he let her speak. She continued, her voice trembling. "I tried to fix it. I tried to be patient, supportive, everything a wife should be. But after a while, you get tired of trying alone. Then you came along, and for the first time in years, I felt something." Her words hit him like a wave, unexpected, overwhelming, and painful. He looked at her carefully. "Rachel, I care about you. Probably more than I should. But you have to know I never meant to come between you and your husband." "I know," she said quickly. "You didn't. You just reminded me of what it feels like to be alive again." The rain grew heavier outside, blurring the streetlights. The air between them thickened with everything unsaid. "I can't explain it," she whispered. "You make me feel seen, Ethan. Not as someone's wife. Not as someone's obligation. Just as me." He swallowed hard, fighting to stay calm. "Then what do you want to do?" She hesitated, looking out the window. "I don't know. I can't just walk away from 10 years of marriage. But I can't go back to pretending either." Ethan leaned back, feeling torn between logic and emotion. "Maybe you need to take time, figure out what you really want. I don't want to be your escape." Her eyes softened. "You're not an escape. You're a reminder that love can still exist even when life feels empty. Those words lingered in his heart long after they left the cafe. Over the next few days, they tried to create distance. No messages, no long talks, no stolen glances. But it didn't last. Every time Rachel walked by, Ethan felt her presence like gravity. Every time he caught her eye, something inside him stirred. One evening, as the office prepared for a big presentation, Rachel stayed late again. Ethan was there too, going over slides in the conference room. She walked in quietly, holding a folder, and said, "You forgot this." Their hands brushed as she passed it to him. That small touch, so innocent yet so electric, made them both freeze. "Rachel," he said quietly. She looked at him, eyes uncertain. "We said we'd keep things professional." "I know," he replied, his voice low. "I'm trying." "So am I," she whispered. "But every time I see you, I forget how." The silence that followed was heavier than words. Then she stepped back, took a deep breath, and said, "I think I'm going to take a break. From work, from everything." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I need space. To think. To breathe. Daniel's away for another week, and I can't keep living like this, half alive, half pretending." Ethan didn't try to stop her. He just nodded, though the thought of not seeing her again twisted something deep inside him. Before leaving, she said softly, "Ethan, whatever happens, thank you. For listening, for caring, for making me feel something real again." Then she walked away, leaving him standing there, caught between relief and heartbreak. Days passed. Her desk remained empty, her laughter gone from the office. The silence felt endless. He tried to bury himself in work, but every song, every quiet evening, reminded him of her. Then one night there was a knock at his door. He opened it, and there she was. Rachel stood in the doorway, soaked from the rain, shivering slightly. She looked both fragile and fierce, as if she had finally made a decision. "Rachel," he whispered. "I couldn't stay away," she said, her voice trembling. "I tried, but I kept thinking about you, about us, and I realized I'm done living in silence." Ethan felt his heart race, but he didn't move closer. "Are you saying you left him?" Tears filled her eyes. "Not yet. But I will. Not because of you, because I need to find myself again. You just help me see that." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain poured behind her, and the world outside seemed to disappear. "I don't know what's next," she said softly, "but I know I don't want to lose what we have not yet." He looked at her, feeling both hope and fear. "Rachel, whatever happens, I just want you to be happy, even if that means I'm not a part of it." She smiled through her tears. "You already are." She turned to leave, but he stopped her gently. "Wait." She turned back, eyes glistening. "Take care of yourself," he said. "Don't lose the person you're becoming." She nodded slowly, whispering, "I won't." Then she left. That night, Ethan stood by the window, watching the rain. He didn't know where her journey would lead, but he knew this wasn't an ending. It was a turning point. For her, for him, for both of them. The next morning, he found an envelope on his desk. Inside was a note written in neat, careful handwriting. "Ethan, thank you for reminding me that my heart still beats. Rachel." He held the note for a long time, feeling the quiet ache of something beautiful, yet incomplete. He didn't see her again for weeks after that, but every time it rained, he thought of Hertha, woman who wore her ring but rediscovered her heart. And though she was gone, she had changed him forever. The days after Rachel left were strangely quiet. Ethan tried to fill his time with work, friends, anything that would distract him from the lingering emptiness in his chest. But nothing worked. He'd wake up, make coffee, stare at his phone, and stop himself from messaging her. Every part of his routine felt incomplete, as if a piece of his life had gone missing. Weeks turned into months. The city shifted from gray winter to the first touch of spring. Flowers returned to the sidewalks. People smiled again, but Ethan still carried the same stillness inside him. He often thought about Rachel, where she might be, what she might be doing. Whether she had finally found peace, One morning, he received a letter. The handwriting was instantly familiar. His hands trembled as he opened it. Ethan, I've been meaning to write for weeks, but didn't know how to start. I left Portland. I'm staying with my sister in Seattle for now. I needed to breathe. I needed to remember who I was before everything fell apart. Daniel and I are officially separating. It's painful, but it feels like the right thing. For both of us. He deserves honesty, and so do I. I don't know what comes next. But I want you to know that what we shared wasn't wrong, it was real. You reminded me that love can still be gentle, even when life isn't. Take care of yourself. Rachel, he read it again and again. There was no promise of us, no talk of a future together. Just gratitude on closure. For a few moments, Ethan felt both heartbreak and relief. She had chosen herself, her healing, her truth. It hurt, but it also made him respect her even more. That night, he walked by the cafe where they had spent so many evenings talking about life, dreams, and the quiet ache of wanting something they couldn't have. The window seat was empty. For the first time, he didn't stop. He just kept walking, realizing that maybe letting go was part of loving someone too. But life has a strange way of bringing people full circle. 6 months later, Ethan was at a marketing conference in Seattle. He wasn't expecting anything extraordinary. It was just another work trip, another city. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. On the second day, as he was heading out of the hotel lobby, he heard a familiar voice behind him. Ethan. He turned. Rachel stood there, holding a cup of coffee, looking surprised but calm. Her hair was shorter now, her eyes clearer. She looked lighter, as if a storm had finally passed. He froze for a second before smiling. Rachel, wow, I didn't expect to see you here. Neither did I, she said with a soft laugh. I started working with a nonprofit in Seattle. They partnered with the conference organizers. There was an awkward pause. Both of them had 100 things to say, but didn't know where to begin. Finally, Ethan said, You look happy. Rachel nodded. I am. It took time, but I'm finally okay. He smiled faintly. I'm glad. You deserve that. She looked at him for a moment as if studying the man she once shared her heart with. And you? How have you been? He shrugged gently. Better, work's good. Life's quiet, she chuckled. You always did like quiet. They both laughed, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't hurt to be near her. They decided to sit down at a cafe nearby. The conversation flowed easily like old friends catching up after years apart. She told him about leaving Daniel, about rediscovering herself, about how she started painting again. He told her about new projects, travel, and how he'd finally learned to cook without burning everything. At one point, she grew thoughtful. You know, I used to think what happened between us was a mistake, but it wasn't. It was necessary. Ethan looked at her curiously. Necessary. She nodded. Yes, because it woke me up. It showed me that life isn't supposed to be lived halfway. You taught me that. You reminded me that love shouldn't feel like a cage, should feel like freedom. He smiled softly. And now you're free. She returned his smile. So are you. They sat in silence for a while, watching the people outside, the laughter, the movement of everyday life. There was peace in that moment, a calm understanding that what they had shared didn't need to be more than it was. As the sun began to set, Rachel glanced at her watch. I should go. My sister's waiting. Ethan nodded. Of course. She stood, hesitated, and then said, Ethan, thank you. For being kind when you didn't have to. For letting me find my way. He smiled. Thank you for showing me that love doesn't always need to end in forever to be real. Rachel's eyes softened. Goodbye, Ethan. Goodbye, Rachel. She turned and walked away, her silhouette fading into the evening crowd. Ethan stood there for a while, watching her go, not with sadness this time, but with quiet gratitude. He realized something important. Not all love stories are meant to last forever. Some exist to teach us, to change us, to remind us what it means to truly feel. When he returned to Portland, life slowly found a new rhythm. The office was different now, new faces, new projects, but sometimes when the rain fell outside, he'd look out the window and remember her smile. Years passed. He never married, though he met people and had his share of almosts. Yet Rachel's memory stayed with him not as pain, but as a story that shaped who he became. One day while cleaning his apartment, he found the note she had left years ago. "Ethan, thank you for reminding me that my heart still beats." He smiled. It no longer made him ache. It just made him grateful for the love that came, changed him, and left him stronger sometimes. Love doesn't need a happy ending. Sometimes its purpose is to awaken something inside us that had been asleep for too long. Ethan understood that now. And as the rain tapped softly against his window, he whispered to the quiet night, "Thank you, Rachel." The sound of rain became his closure, gentle, endless, and real.